Welcome to the J&J Show. I'm Jeff, he's Jerry, and today we are here to talk about missing 411. This is a phenomenon that was brought to light by David Paulides in his book series. He also has a channel on YouTube where he covers these. Is that right, Jerry? He has a channel on
Yeah.
YouTube? Yeah.
Yep.
And it's a very bizarre phenomenon where people go missing in national parks and in other very rural locations, and there's just baffling, mysterious circumstances where they're there 1 second and perhaps somebody they're with turns their back and they turn back around and they're just gone and they can't find them, and they sometimes they're never found, sometimes they're found days or weeks later, and it's baffling the circumstances of how these people go missing in these parks. And it seems like that the parks don't really want to talk about it because these happenings, they go unreported a lot, or the park tries to cover it up, or they try to use very flimsy excuses to try to explain away what's happened. I know we often joke about swamp gases and UFOs, and that's not really one of the ones they use, but they do use some pretty flimsy excuses to try to explain away what happens to these people. And sometimes the people turn up and they're just fine. Other times they find their bodies in places that there's no possible way that they could have covered that distance in the amount of time they were missing, or they find 5-year-old children 100 foot cliffs that expert climbers have trouble scaling. So these are very baffling and mysterious circumstances. And it's a phenomenon that David Paulides has made very popular. He brought it to light with his book series and then his YouTube. And I guess my first question, Jerry, for you is why is this something that we want to cover on a Christian channel? Why? How does this tie in?
Well, when I first heard about this phenomenon, like everybody else, everybody else, the first thing that I thought to myself was um, that there's certainly a legitimate explanation to this. Is a logical. I thought to myself, what's so unbelievable about people in wilderness areas going missing? You would expect that, and it's reasonable to think that. And invariably, everybody, when they come to this phenomenon, says the same thing, and they all understandably think to themselves, "Well, I know I'll be able to figure this out. There must be some confusion somewhere. This is just people that are, falling off a rock and not being seen, or, kids wander off and fluke accidents and whatnot." The most common explanation is that, well, there's a lot of murder goes on, and there's a lot of serial killers that kill people. And really, all these excuses are true. This kind of stuff, the outdoors is a crazy place, and we know that weird things do happen. Um, Speaking of the outdoors, real quick, I want to clarify something real fast that I said in the last video we did. I made a misspeak on Hurricane Katrina. I had referenced that Ian was stronger than Katrina, and actually, they're pretty close, but Katrina was a 5 and Ian was almost a 5. So I felt bad about that. I never claimed to be a weather or a climate historian. So I wanted to go back and clear that up in case anybody hears that from the last video. That was a misspeak on my part, and we try to be as absolutely accurate here as possible. But this 411, it's kind of surprising, Jeff, that we've gotten this far into our show and haven't really talked about it yet, because it's a mountain of an issue. It's as if, imagine we said we were going to talk about the Civil War tonight. You can't talk about the American Civil War really in 1 hour. You can only break apart certain aspects of it and try to approach the mountain from a certain path, and that's really all we can do with this. This is a massive subject. You're correct when you say that David Paulides has been the man when it comes to uncovering what's been going on. Now, it's not to say he's the only one, because he will tell you, and I can tell people who listen to this podcast, if you give this a chance, you will get hooked on this. And It's interesting as it can be. It can be very sad because one thing, these are real people. If you want to talk about UFOs, or you want to talk about the end times, you want to talk about any number of other topics that are out there, people can ignore that, and it's not a big deal. But with this subject, you can ignore it if you want to. But regardless, these are actual people, hundreds of them, probably thousands at this point, with names, with faces, with lives, with families, and they go missing. And in many cases, they're never seen again. And thankfully, in a very few cases, they are found. It does happen. The majority, however, they are not found. And there's a lot of people who have had lives wrecked as a result of this. Is not a joke. This is not something that you make a funny movie out of, like Harry and the Hendersons, or get a good laugh out of. It's very serious, deadly serious. And so when David Paulides first, he doesn't really talk about a lot. He was really doing peripheral research in Yosemite. I believe it was Yosemite. It could have been Yellowstone. It was a national park. And it's a very interesting story. And this was not long ago. This was only, I think, 10 years ago, maybe it was 2007 or so. It hasn't been long. And he was in a motel room, and he hears a knock at the door. He goes and answers the door, and it's an off-duty park ranger. And again, I don't want to misspeak. So it's either a park ranger, he points out that the national parks have their own police, their own law enforcement that are different from park rangers. So it may have been one of these individuals. There's several levels of law enforcement at these federal parks, and it was either a park ranger or one of these law officials. But anyhow, the guy was off duty in plain clothes, and I think it was two of them actually. And they asked him, "Is it okay if we come in? We'd like to ask you a question." He's like, "Sure." So they come in and sits down. He has no idea what they're. He's researching another topic altogether, and they start talking to him. And Paulides is a former police officer and detective from the San Francisco Bay Area, in California. That's where he's from. And so I guess these guys were aware that he was in law. I guess they had also run into him when he was doing research, and knew that he was an investigator, and thought he would be an ideal person to bring this subject to. And they told him, "Listen, I don't know if you're aware, but we'd like somebody to look into the number of cases of people going missing in inexplicable circumstances in Yosemite National Park." And he said, "Well, what do you mean by inexplicable?" And so they had the conversation. I don't want to drag this out too much, but he said, "Okay, well, I'll look into it and let you know." And on the way home, he said he called a few law enforcement friends of his, which he had plenty of, and asked them to look into some cases in the Yosemite area and see if there was any fire that was causing the smoke these guys are talking about. And sure enough, there was. So he started looking into it, and I believe now he's on his 11th book, and has uncovered, at this point, it has to be in the thousands. I know that I've read hundreds myself. And if you're listening to this, I have friends actually who have told me, when I told them about this, that, well, I'm sure it's explainable. And I'll tell them, "Listen, just look into it. Okay, don't automatically assume, 'cause that's what people do. Look into it and see." And sure enough, now this one friend has actually has actually had her picture taken with David Paulides, and here she was a year ago. I was she was a naysayer and whatnot, an old high school friend that's really into some of the cryptid subjects and whatnot, and she met Scott Carpenter too. I was kind of jealous at that point in time. Paulides is careful to weed out any cases that could possibly be animal predation, or human on human violence, or a situation where someone may have been sick or unhealthy, or been suffering from mental illness. These are any of these at all, he throws out. So these are not considered. And so most of the missing cases, he will tell you, people that go missing are not unusual, or not fall into the category of a 411. It's a minority, but the minority still has a lot. He has come up with, was it 21 clusters in the United States of people who have gone missing. And I think his research goes back to the 1890s. And they are mostly around the Great Lakes, the Rocky Mountains, and different spots along the East Coast. Virginia, North Carolina are not hot spots because Jeff's in North Carolina. I'm from Virginia. Both the states do have a couple. Virginia has one we may talk about later, but I would not list Virginia as a hot spot for this at all. East Tennessee, however, has had some of, and of course, Western North Carolina has had the Great Smoky Mountains its fair share, and perhaps one of the most famous with the Dennis Martin case, which was as tragic as all of these are. So he started doing his books, and he found there's more to this. He's found, like you said, Jeff, before, that the authorities and the government is extremely reluctant to come off any information. We have the Freedom of Information Act, which states that that you're able to submit a FOIA and get information on certain cases. So there was one case that he submitted. It was a 14-year-old girl named Stacy Arras, and this was in the late 70s, early 80s, and she was with a group of 7 or 8 individuals who were vacationing in Yosemite National Park. And they had been horseback riding and were staying in some remote cabins out in the park. And they had ridden back to the cabins. Stacy had gone inside, changed clothes, and she and a 72-year-old man were just going to walk a few feet down to the lake there and take some pictures of the lake. And everyone in the party saw that's what they were going. So they walked down through the woods there a little way, not far at all. And the older gentleman sat down on a rock, and Stacy said she was going to go down a little bit further down the path and take some pictures of the lake. And so she started walking down the path and was never seen again. And a huge search of the area that was done. You know, you call in dogs, you got rangers, you got helicopters, you got volunteers. This scenario plays out over and over and over. All they found was the lens cap of her camera. And to this day, no trace of Stacy has ever been found. So this was one of the ones that caught Paulides' eye right off the bat. And he submitted a FOIA. And Yosemite came back and asked him, why do you want this information? What is it? And he told the lady who had called, I'm pretty sure it was a lady. He had a couple of bad phone conversations, but this one I think was the lady. And he said, well, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to even ask me, why do I want it? And being federal bureaucrats, they were extremely snotty, as they always are, and said, well, we're not going to give it to you anyway. We were just curious why you wanted it. And she said, he said, well, let me ask you this. Do you have a list of people who have gone missing in the federal parks? And she said, no, we don't do that. And he said, well, how can you not have a list of people who've gone missing? And she says, well, we rely upon the memory of our staff, and which he thought was funny. And she said, well, she came back and said, well, we can, if you really want, we can provide you a list of people who've gone missing in Yosemite and then all the national parks together. The cost for the Yosemite list will be $34,000, and the cost for the parks nationwide would be $1.4 million. And so, you know, obviously he wasn't in a position where he was able to spend that kind of money on it. And he's encountered this over and over from the federal government, is clearly covering. So they do not want, you would think with missing person cases, they would be welcoming with open arms anybody who was, I mean, the families have never had closure on this stuff. And, you know, you mentioned the Dennis Martin case, which was July of 1969. And it was this case here has generated a lot of controversy because it's so blatant that there's been a lot of people who have kind of refused to accept what happened. But basically, the family, it was a father and a grandfather and Dennis Martin, who was, I want to say 7 years old, 6 years. I think he's 6 years old, and they were in the Great Smoky Mountains, and it was July, and they went down. They were hiking into this meadow that has all these. There's all these details you can look up on your own. And there was another family there that was in this meadow, and they were going to picnic together. And the other family had kids. By pure coincidence, the other family had the same last name of Martin, apparently, which they thought was kind of odd. And so the kids were playing, running around, and Dennis Martin's father said that he noticed that Dennis ran behind a bush, and the father got a very bad feeling and began to run in the direction of his son. And by the time he got to the bush, the child was gone. And he ran up. The trail was right there. The Appalachian Trail was right there. He ran up one direction and back down the other, calling the boy's name, yelling, and could not. There was no sign whatsoever of him. By a strange coincidence, there was another family that was in the park several miles away that on that day had entered the park and asked rangers where could they go to find a black bear, where they wanted to see bear. And so they were told to go to this one overlook, which they did. Long story short, while they were there, they heard a blood curdling scream and looked and saw what they described as a very hairy looking individual, a very strange, wild looking thing moving through the woods from tree to tree with something thrown over its shoulder. And this was kept from the family. The family was not told. For some reason, the FBI, the park rangers, did not tell the family that of Dennis Martin that this family had seen this and that it could possibly have been Dennis being taken from the area, because it was several miles away. And there was very flimsy excuses given as to why the family of Martin was incensed that they hadn't been told this could have been a lead, and it was blown off. And later, apparently, there was some Green Berets that were brought in to search the area, which raises a lot of eyebrows. The case just has a lot of, and then other people have said, well, no, it was just it was just some hillbillies in the area that took Dennis Martin, and trying to blow it off as just being hillbillies that grabbed him and put him in an old car and drove off. But there's, as often as the case, the explanations don't really add up any more than the situation, what we have. And so those are the types, and we have lots. And this is just, those are just two. You can go on and on. I mean, the cases of an individual who was, they literally were, there's several videos, missing 411 videos if people want to look. There's one where the three old gentlemen in New York are going hunting, and they're spaced out in a line to hunt deer. And the old guy in the middle, and they're only, a couple hundred yards apart, the old guy in the middle vanishes. They go to pick him up. He's not there. And no trace of him is ever found. And the gentleman on one side said that he heard a very strange metallic-like noise at one point. The getting back to the Dennis Martin, though, I wanted to mention, when you hear that thing the family saw the thing with it sounds very much like, oh, well, that must be Sasquatch that's done that. David Paulides has been very careful to not say what he thinks it is. He has not come out and said that it's UFOs or that it's Bigfoot or that it's portals that people are walking into. He has not said, and that has really upset a lot of people. To be honest, I think it's been brilliant because he allows everyone to look at the information and come to their own conclusions. And since this is our show, you and I can come to our own conclusions. And from having read a bunch of his books, it's very obvious to me, and this gets back to what you asked originally, why is this relevant to what we do? It's very clear that something is preying on mankind. The guy, I forget the gentleman's name that does Coast to Coast, but he said that it's almost as if something is fishing, and it's taking humans. And just like when we go fishing, sometimes we throw the fish up on the bank to die. Sometimes we throw the fish back in the water to live, and sometimes we take the fish home and it's never seen again. and it seems like a pretty good analogy. But clearly, people are being preyed upon and taken. And for Jeff and I, it's a no-brainer. It's not Sasquatch, it's not Dogman, it's not UFOs, it's not portals, it's all the above, because all of it connects back into the kingdom of darkness. It's all run by the same crew. They're all on the same page. Even the secular researchers, when they study enough, they begin to realize that all these entities are on the same sheet of music, and they're all operating. And sometimes these missing 411, they find where it looks like the person's been torn apart. And when I hear those, that sounds very much like a Dogman attack. Other times when the children are taken, they talk about being carried by the bear man. And the Native Americans have long talked about Sasquatch taking children. We have plenty of accounts of that. Other times, it seems very much like it's a portal situation where somebody has simply walked and disappeared into a portal and it's just gone. And we're starting to learn more about that. And then other times, it may very well have been UFOs, like the time when the guy was put, when they finally found him, he was on top of a gigantic pile of gravel, like he'd just been set up there. Very odd. But that's just a brief synopsis of what the 411 is. From here, we can get into all sorts of details, and I'm sure you got comments on your own, because I know you've listened to it and researched it quite a bit yourself.
Well, yeah, I was definitely going to mention, excuse me, the tie-ins to the cryptids, aliens, supernatural, paranormal. I believe, along with a lot of the stuff that you've already said, that demonic activity. There are a lot of reports, and I've heard stories about satanic rituals happening in these parks at night, deep in the forest and stuff. So I have no doubt that that's all part of it too. I mean, as you said, it could be serial killers, it could be people murdering other people, but the more you look into this, the deeper it goes, and it's definitely one heck of a rabbit hole to go down, and it just gets more weird and more mysterious the deeper you go. But yeah, like you, I think it's all of the above. There's something else I wanted to mention too, is that if you overlay the map, excuse me, if you overlay the map of where these people go missing to the map of the U.S. cave system, it is spooky how they line up. Right. It's almost like whatever's preying on humanity could be coming out of these caves, and these cave systems go deep, miles under the earth. So it's like the ocean. We don't know what's down there. So who's to say there's not something in these caves too? I mean, that could be a possible explanation as to what's going on. But going back to the flimsy excuses that they give, I mentioned it in the intro, mountain lion attacks. They always try to attribute it to mountain lions or something like that, maybe a bear attack or something. But when you look at these cases and you look at the facts, and that's what David Paulides reports, is he's kind of like a news reporter. He just reports the facts, let you make up your own mind. He doesn't try to sway you one way or another. But like you said, this is our channel, and we have the luxury of delving into this and
Sure.
speculating as to what it could be. But it's fascinating how all these things line up, and I think this ties into our cryptid talks. I think like you said, that some of these things are cryptids that are taking people. Maybe it's alien abductions, people going into portals. I've heard lots of stories about, I heard one recently. Actually, maybe it was the one you told. I think you already told it on the channel about the guy. He took a step forward and his foot disappeared. And
yeah.
I
didn't tell that. That was you, I think, that talked about that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this guy had backed up against a tree because he felt a feeling of dread, and he just felt like he was in peril and danger. And he stayed against this tree with his gun for a while, and then finally he got the courage to step forward. When he did, he looked down and half of his foot disappeared. And he reached forward and his hand disappeared. So he pulled both back, and then he kind of like went back against the tree and sat a while. And then when he took off walking, it nothing happened. He was able to go on his way. He was able to find his way out of the woods and find his way back. So there's a lot of weird stuff out there, a lot of paranormal and supernatural. And I've said this on the channel before, that if you believe in the good and you believe in God and you believe in angels and you believe in divine intervention and miracles here on earth and all of the good, you have to at least acknowledge the bad, because it's referenced so much in the Bible. Satan, demonic activity, all of this stuff is referenced in the Bible, so you know it's fact. So you can't completely dismiss that there's an evil element to what's going on.
Completely, definitely, no doubt. There's so much as we talk. This is one of those subjects where you just have dozens of things flood your mind, and we try to foresee what it is that perhaps that some of the listeners may wonder about. And you think about serial killers. That's the one thing that gets brought up a lot. The problem is that first of all, a lot of these cases are out in the middle of absolute nowhere. And if that were to be a legitimate explanation, we would have basically a ton of serial killers living out in the wilds, preying upon people in areas where they aren't sure if they're ever going to come across somebody or not. And also, one of the big things is with one of the books is nothing but hunters that have gone missing. And most of these individuals are armed and still go missing. If it was serial killers, we'd have had a couple incidences where the serial killer would have gotten the worst end of the deal and been blown away. And yet we've never heard of a case like that, where someone was attacked by a maniac out in Wyoming, and he manages to hit him with both barrels and kill the guy. So there's also another thing is people talk about some of these cases, especially a lot of them are found in water. The bodies are found floating in water. And so that automatically people say, okay, well, this person just fell in and drowned. The problem with that is that the coroner's report doesn't specify that the person they had already been dead before they ever were in the water. And another explanation is hypothermia, that the person, the reason, because a lot of times they're found with their clothes removed, and even more disturbing than that is a lot of times they're found with their clothes all on backwards. And so one of the problems with the hypothermia explanation is I don't really think that affects people, because people who are suffering from hypothermia will sometimes begin to remove clothes, even, which is completely opposite of what you would think, but they will. But that's not a problem in the summertime. People in Florida don't suffer from hypothermia in the summertime. If you're floating in water, even warm water, eventually, yeah, you'll battle hypothermia, but that's not a problem when it's the temperature is warm. So a lot of that's the problem with, and it's one of those things where when you've read enough cases and you've listened to enough cases, you begin to realize, and eventually the light bulb goes on with everybody. You realize, okay, yeah, it's possible that a couple of these could be explained away, but not many, because there's a whole band of these disappearances that involve children. And Paulides could have done whole books just on the children that have gone missing. And it's probably the creepiest. It's some of the most frustrating to study. And I will say that children do seem to be the ones that are recovered the most. I'm not saying they're recovered all the time, because they aren't. It seems like about a third of the time. They're young children, many times they're not able to even speak and talk about what it is that has happened. A lot of times, even the adults, their memories have been wiped, and they can't remember exactly what it is they've gone through. One guy that survived was skiing in Lake Placid in New York, and told his friends he was going up for one more run. And it's a very the ski area is not heavily wooded, but somehow he got separated from the rest of the group and was missing for 6 or 7 days. This guy, and this is unusual, this doesn't usually happen. I don't want to give people the wrong impression, but it just shows you how crazy. This guy ends up calling his wife 6 or 7 days later from the airport in Sacramento. He says he has no idea how he got to Sacramento. He's got a head injury of some sort, and he wants his wife to come pick him up. And instantly people say, well, he was just out there fooling around with some woman, is what he did. So he decides that he's going to ski off right in the middle of a skiing vacation and injure himself in the head, and then go to Sacramento, and then call his wife. There's a lot more details to this. The guy this wasn't a case of adultery. So yeah, those do go on. This was not one of those cases. And this guy was lucky. He doesn't want to talk about it. He's managed to go back. He can't remember what happened. He's managed to resurrect his life. David Paulides has been very respectful, because David really does care about the victims' families, and he really genuinely does. He is not somebody who was out glamorizing this stuff and walking, treading all over people's graves to make money. He genuinely is concerned. He goes and visits with the families. He is somebody who is just a very good individual. And he hasn't harassed this guy, because he said the guy clearly is upset by what he went through. He feels lucky he's not dead, and he just wants to get back to his life. So David hasn't harassed him, for explanations and details and what have you. But these types of things, there's one guy, it was a guy, it was Adidas, is one of the Converse. It was one of the heirs to a major tennis shoe company, and I can't remember which one it was. In the 1940s, this guy's out hunting in the Great Lakes area, and a snowstorm moves in, and he just goes out to get some more wood and is never seen again. To this day, he's never been found. No trace of him whatsoever. Went outside the cabin to get some firewood, and it's like he just stepped off the end of the earth. And that one, it was rare, because they actually brought in Canadian and United States. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police came in, and they searched all over the border area, never found the guy. If you get one of these books and read up, and that's really the best way to do this, you can listen online. David does do interviews, but the books are the best way. And if you do end up getting one, do not get them off Amazon. Amazon, for some reason, charges over $100 for a book. You can get the book, I think, for $19.99 off of Can-Am Missing, which is David Paulides' website. That's where you go and get them. I don't know why there's so much on Amazon. David doesn't know why either. But Can-Am Missing is the website you can go and get these books. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jeff. But there's a lot of legitimate explanations for stuff. The problem is they all miss the mark. They're not able to explain what goes on with the water, the missing time, all these things that we haven't even begun to touch on yet. The prevalence of the water. There was something when I was just talking that the stillness, the quiet that occurs that people talk about, the strange. The people who have missed becoming a 411 just barely, and they felt like. But anyhow, we'll get to those. I wanted to give you a chance to weigh in.
Well, a lot of times too, when they pull them out of the water, they want to say it was an accidental drowning, but there's no water in the lungs. These people were have no water in their lungs, and the coroners say that they were dead. That there was no way they could have drowned, because there's no water in them, and that it's pretty obvious they were dead before they were put in the water. Another thing is that sometimes people will go missing, and their clothes will be found neatly folded and neatly stacked on a rock. I don't know how many stories I've listened to where their clothes were neatly stacked with the shoes set right on top of them, and just three person's been missing a week, and all of a sudden their clothes show up, and then there's nothing else. They're never seen again, or they find their backpack, and it's like leaned up against a tree, and it's just out of nowhere because they've searched that part of the forest, they've searched that part of the park. That's another thing that happens is that they'll search in these areas, and then they'll go back, and the area they just searched, they'll either find the body, or they'll find the articles of clothing, or they'll find the backpack, or maybe a shoe or something. And excuse me, another thing, you brought up the weather. There's been a number of stories where when someone goes missing, all of a sudden just bad weather rolls into the area inexplicably, and there was no forecast for it. It's just all of a sudden, somebody goes missing, and then a blizzard rolls in, or a thunderstorm, and it makes the search area nearly impossible, especially in the snow, because you can follow footprints, but when the snowstorm rolls in right after the person goes missing, that makes it impossible to track them. Same thing with the rain washes away the footprints, makes it impossible for them to track them. So that's another bizarre element to this that maybe stuck out to me more so than just about anything else, was that the weather phenomenon that happened as soon as somebody goes missing, before they can even get back to the ranger station or call 911 or get a search party out, a freak weather occurrence happens in the area, and they find it nearly impassable. They have to sit and wait until this weather stops, and then they go back out, but by then it's too late.
All the time. You hear about that all the time. I would go so far as to say that you hear about what you just described in probably 60% of the cases. It happens all the time. Now, when I say that all the time, I'm not saying it happens every day out here in the woods. I'm saying in reference to the 411 missing cases, what Jeff just described with the weather happens all the time. You read it over and over and over and over and over. Matter of fact, people have criticized David's books and said, these books, they can be kind of dry. After a while, you're reading the same thing over, and his response is, yeah, that's kind of the point, that you're seeing that the same thing, you have a trend here, that they're not written for entertainment. They're written for you to see how this is occurring. And like Jeff said, this happens over and over. And people say, well, see, that what the bad weather is what causes them to go missing. But it's not, because the people are reported as missing before the weather, and the weather does not change until the search begins. And like I said, this is our channel, so we can say what we want to say, but there is zero doubt in my mind that right there proves that this is I won't go so far as say it's the devil, but it is the dark forces. It's his legions, his army, that whole bad group that he's in charge of, that he runs. And you think about when Jesus and the disciples got in the boat to cross the sea, and that storm came up out of nowhere, and it was the same. And the Christians do not realize, but the enemy definitely has the ability to control the weather. Listen, humans are now getting the ability to control the weather with sowing storms and rain, and having weapons that can cause tsunamis or earthquakes. That certainly it is not beyond the pale. You hear it. You even hear this in Bigfoot sightings at times and other encounters. And I tell you, the reason why Jeff and I talk about this is like Steve Ishtal has mostly thought of as dealing with Sasquatch issues. But he said just today in the video that he can't conceive how somebody gets locked on to just the Sasquatch issue and doesn't see any of the rest of it. And there's people who do that with UFOs, only UFOs. The stuff is all interconnected. And if you go and you look at all these different things, you begin to connect dots. And just like the crazy pictures that Mr. Pitt and Seinfeld, remember he couldn't see the picture, and he tried to unfocus or focus and whatnot.
Right.
He finally gets mad. Those computerized pictures that were made in the 90s that were so popular, it's the same thing. When you look at all these different eventually you see. And for Christians, you can see these cases and you know what's happening. Now, why is it? Now, and like I said, there's so many things. I'm just writing down stuff here left and right that we're just flying over that we can go back,
Me too. Yeah.
back to. Why is it that these people are selected? I do not believe that the enemy is able to kill anyone without permission. I don't believe that the enemy can just go through and kill anybody they want. There's a big one of the guys, the Dog Man Encounters Radio, the Vic Cundiff, who I like a great deal. I love his show, I think, a lot, but he's trying to help these people who've seen these things, these creatures, and so I understand why he says this, but I disagree with it. He says, listen, that thing, if it wanted you, it could have taken you, but it didn't. I understand why he says that, because he's trying to make him feel better. The fact of the matter is that's not always true. I know for a fact that these beings cannot just take anybody they want, because they don't own Christians. They do not have the authority to take Christians without Jesus granting. And that's why, to my knowledge, I've never come across born again Christians who have been 411 cases. I'm not saying they can't be, because the Lord has an appointed time for everybody. I have not come across any. So that whole aspect of this is very important, because clearly, like, I believe something, and I know what, is preying upon mankind. I don't know if they have a quota. I don't know if these people who are going missing, I don't know what the story is. We do know that a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them are on the opposite spectrums of the intelligence line. In other words, David has found that you have geniuses, lots of doctors and physicists go missing, and then those who have intellectual challenges are also prone to go missing. But again, when you say that, those two groups still probably are a minority of the people who go missing. It's not the majority, but they do show up more often than they really should. We don't know. Like so many other things we say on this channel, we don't come on here and say we have all the explanations for everything that happens in the 411. We don't. I don't know why people with a very high IQ, I would just be able to make guesses, but I don't know the answer to that. Or people that he's found, people with German heritage are more prone to go missing. People who carry a personal locator beacon on their body do not tend to go missing. People who carry a firearm are less likely, although he has a whole book on hunters that have gone missing. So I'm not really sure how that squares. But again, I'll get carried away, so I'm going to hand it back over to you for your 2 cents.
Well, you said people complain about the repetitiveness in his books and how they can be dry, but that, to me, when I hear something from a story, especially stories like these or stories like cryptids, where the same things are happening and the same people are saying the same things, like the word mechanical, I know you used that earlier. A lot of these skinwalker stories I hear, they use that word to describe the sounds that they hear, that they're almost mechanical. And I've seen it.
Interesting.
Is people.
I didn't know that.
Yes. Yeah, they do. It's repeated so many times in these stories, especially the skinwalker stories. It's like, I hear this sound and it's like it's on repeat, and it's perfectly played the exact same way every single time. One person described it as almost like a sound bite being played over and over, and it's just perfect every single time, and it sounds mechanical. I know it's a little off topic, but that to me just lends credence to these people's stories and to these cases being legit. When you hear the same circumstances over and over, that's not boring, it's not dry. It right. Just it's proving that, you know, if something happens the same way every single time, that just, you know, lends credence to the fact that it is true.
Sure.
At least for me.
And that's not off topic at all. That's what we're trying to say, is that this is something that this encompasses a lot of different unusual events that are going on planet Earth. And again, you can blow it off and say, oh, this is just a hoax. But the problem with this case is here, maybe we will, hopefully, we can flash up cover pictures of David's books on here, and you can see the faces yourself. These are real people who've gone missing. And there was one lady that she was a home and garden or outdoor writer in Seattle. And she was in her late 50s, I believe, early 60s. It was a nice spring day. And they went up on, Shasta's in California. So it would have been near, drawing a blank, the big one in Washington. I've been dealing with Shasta so much. I've been thinking about that. But she went up on the mountain.
The mountain. I could have said it if you wouldn't ask me.
I know. So she and a friend went up, a boyfriend or a male friend, may not have been a boyfriend. It's not really relevant, but she and a man went up together to hike up on the hill, and it was early spring. And so there were still snow patches, and he wasn't apparently doing as well. Maybe he was a little bit older. So he sat down on a log, and she said she was just going around the corner of the trail, over top some snow and some ice that was there, because there was an overlook. She can get some pictures. So he sat down, and she went around the corner to go take the pictures, and was never seen again. No trace whatsoever. And you read this over and over and over. These were actual people. This lady wrote for a magazine in Seattle. And what causes this? Are these people just, at this point, really, I do believe in all the above. I think sometimes these cases like that right there, I think there's a portal. Scott Carpenter, on one of his videos, has actually shown a portal opening up. He caught it behind him, as he often does, because these cameras are facing behind him. And this portal in the middle of the trail, as it opens up, and you can see a figure inside the portal. Steve had a scientist that wrote in today to his show saying that was legitimate, that what Scott is showing in there, that scientists have found, that is, they're studying that, and that's the case. That does happen. And so I believe that a lot of these people are going into portals unknowingly. And that gets also back to what we are talking about as far as end times and Christianity and the battle between the Lord and his people and his angels and the dark side, is that there is that veil. We don't see angels and demons. They manifest sometimes, but we don't see them just flying around, out in over the woods and whatnot. They can operate very much behind that veil in a different dimension. Secular researchers that get into this say that a lot of the UFO stuff has been, championed as being interplanetary, and the people say it's not interplanetary, it's interdimensional. And that's not as popular because people want it to be interplanetary, so that there'll be aliens that'll be nice and come teach us how to treat the environment and to teach us how we can find the fountain of youth and never die. And that way we don't have to worry about that mean God guy who expects us to live righteously. And so for a lot of people, they cling to the alien explanation. But the fast of it is that it's interdimensional. And that's where these beings exist, whether they are fallen angels or demons. We know that these giants, these hairy giants, they slip beyond. They've managed to, we see reports of them slipping beyond, just disappearing into thin air. The smell that is associated with these creatures, a lot of times people think, well, that's just because they don't bathe and they live out in the woods, and we would stink too. But the smell is most likely, according to the scientists that have looked at it, is not because they don't bathe. The smell is a result of the portal opening and closing. And that's what that's a result of, the horrible smell. And so because they do come and go out of that portal, and they don't do it all the time. Not all of them appear to be able to do it. I mean, look at the Patterson film, the famous Patterson-Gimlin film. Clearly that being that's walking across along the wood line doesn't disappear. So they're not able to do it all the time at will. We don't know. Um, but we're trying to link. We have all the puzzle pieces on the table in front of us, and we can get a pretty good idea of what type of puzzle we're looking at here, but we can't necessarily get all the pieces. But I tell you, people need to be aware of this, because this one tonight, this 411, this can come home to hit a family real fast, because the number of children, I mean, I would not be as free with allowing my kids to play in the woods after having learned about all this as I was when my kids were little. And I'm sure my parents probably think about how much time I spent out in the middle of the woods. The chances of something happening are slim, but it does happen. And you see these books, and you flip through and see the pictures, the Dennis Martins, and his dad was never the same. His dad never recovered from that. David Paulides went and talked to him 30 years later after little Dennis Martin went missing. And the father, just didn't want to talk about it. David explained to him, listen, I've driven all the way from California just to talk with you about this. Is there any way that, we could just stand here for a few minutes? So the guy agreed. And he never recovered from that day in the Smoky Mountains. And you see the picture of Dennis Martin, you just wonder, what happened. And that's not, you can't cookie cut these cases. Like you've said, they come in all different shapes and sizes. And sometimes they're hikers. A lot of times at first, it was people really keyed in on the fact that the last hiker in line or the first one were the ones that went missing. And that does happen. People, a lot of times they would say they were just right here. They were just here a minute ago, and no trace is ever found of them.
They look away, and then they look back, and the person's just gone.
Gone.
In a blink of an eye, the snap of fingers, just gone. Excuse me. What you were saying earlier, we were talking about the weather phenomenon and how these beings can control the weather. That points also toward the stillness that people come across, or when anytime there's an encounter with a cryptid or with something else, people always described how the forest just goes quiet. There's a stillness. Even the wind stops blowing. A lot of these stories, they say even the wind stopped blowing. And that just, again, points to, that weather phenomenon. I made a note about that, so I wanted to bring that up real quick. And then it points to it being supernatural. Yep. And, these beings behind the veil is supernatural, and these portals that lead from one side of the veil to the other, allowing these beings. I mean, we discussed it in one episode how we think that Sasquatch is both physical and supernatural. How right. Yeah, so if they have these supernatural powers where they can mind speak like God speaks to us, then who's to say they don't have the power to control the weather or to bring a stillness over the woods or to stop the wind. And you said that they're held back if they you said something about them not being able to kill like
indiscriminately. Right,
indiscriminately. It points to the fact that they're held back until that veil is lifted.
Yep. That
points to that. And excuse me, sorry, allergies are giving me a fit right now. You said that it's almost like they need permission to take the people that they do take. And it's kind of like when in the book of Job, when the devil went to God and he wanted to test Job's faith, he had to get permission from God before he could do anything to Job.
Right.
And that just, and you always hear in these stories too about, I believe it was you mentioned the aliens back in the 50s or something, where they needed permission to set up bases on Earth. They needed permission to come here. You hear it in these cryptid stories all the time. You have to give them permission to enter your homes. A lot of times they won't enter your homes unless you give them permission. It's the same thing with demons and the evil. You have to open the door. You have to give them permission. You have to give them a way in. And I think, it all goes back to the book of Job, and I think that book tells us very clearly that they can't mess with you if you don't give them permission.
Right.
And because the devil, he cannot test Job until God gave him permission. And even when God gave him permission, he gave him limits to what he could do to Job. He was like, you can do this, but you can only go so far.
Right.
And
and the same thing, Jeff, the same thing with Peter. Remember, Jesus told Peter that Satan has demanded to sift you like wheat, but I've interceded for you. So there's two cases where he demanded.
Right. So especially when it comes to Christians, Peter was a Christian, Job wasn't, because Jesus hadn't come yet. But he
was righteous, though.
He was devoutly religious, and he was righteous in God's eyes. And even God said, when I think the book starts out with God saying to the devil, "Have you seen my servant Job?"
Right.
He's bragging on Job because Job is such a righteous man. And it's especially true, like you said, Christians don't go missing. Why don't we go missing? It's because we're protected.
Right.
I fully believe that we're protected from these creatures, that we're protected from evil, and it's why we have the power to dispel demons. I've told my story on this channel about how I, sent a demon packing. I chased him out of here. I rebuked him and told him never return. I've never had any other problems, and I did it in Jesus' name. And I think it all just ties together.
Yep. It's real. And I really want to be careful, because it's not a matter of these people are being taken and they deserve it because they don't know the Lord. It's not not their fault that they're being taken. That's why I'm adamant to say that these people are being preyed upon.
Right.
And because the entities are careful, and Paulides has mentioned this, that it's almost like every 30 years they'll hit a town, but they'll let enough time go by to where our generation forgets about the previous incident before they do it, because they still, just like all these entities, whether it's the UFOs, the cryptids, they have been told by the Lord, these are the rules. You will not show yourself to mankind, because right now this is the church age, and it's everybody's free will. Whether or not somebody believes in the Lord it's upon them. It's their decision, and it's not going to be influenced by these supernatural beings running around, so that you don't see them unless you pursue them. If you pursue the Lord, you're going to interact with the Lord. If you pursue the devil, you're going to interact. That's why the hitchhiker effect with these things, people who go out seeking this stuff, whether it's a ghost in the haunted house or Bigfoot out in Sasquatch out in the woods. And I hate those two names. I've gotten like Steve, Bigfoot and Sasquatch, because they're so much associated with goofy, stupid movies. The forest giants is really what they are. They're the leftover giants that live out in the forest. And we've had a whole episode on that. But all this stuff is connected in together, and you're 100% right. And the earth has been given over to these beings. The Bible makes clear mankind chose the devil and what he had to offer. Even though Jesus rules and has saved us, the earth and this current age is run by the devil. So if he wants to manipulate the weather, he can manipulate the weather. And that's not a big, I don't know why Christians would think that that's off limits for them when the Lord has already handed creation over to the devil for a time. And because that's what mankind chose. But it's not going to be his for much longer, and before he's bound. So another whole aspect that you mentioned earlier that's really important, we just kind of throw out with these stories they're never seen again. Well, it's not like the people just go about their day and nobody bothers to search. Every time we say they're never seen again, there is a massive search that is done, and it involves you just run the gambit: helicopters and hikers and the dogs. That's a big part of it. The search dogs, and these dogs love to search. And in these cases, the dogs either are not interested in searching or they refuse to search. We don't know if it's because there's no scent there to search for, or whether the dogs are afraid to. But the dogs do not want to cooperate in these, and it baffles the handlers because these dogs live to search. And so it's just yet another very strange, very odd aspect of this.
Well,
There was
there's also the cases where the dogs go a certain ways and then just stop. Like the
yeah,
scent just stops, just completely
yep.
out of nowhere. It just all of a sudden just stops.
Also with the dogs, in a large number of the cases where children go missing, they go missing with the family pet. They're in the yard 1 minute, and the next minute they're gone, and the family dog is gone. And invariably, in these cases, the family dog returns, but the child is does not return. And a lot of times they're found later, and like you said before, they're found in a place that has been searched thoroughly and heavily, and they're in a place where it looks as if they've just been placed there to be picked up. And other times, they're found a long ways away, much further. A toddler should not be able to cross 5 miles of mountains and rivers in a 24-hour period, and to be found up on the top of a cliff where a mountain goat wouldn't go. That's not normal. That child did not get there on their own. And like we said before, a lot of times these children are so small that they are not able to verbalize what happened to them. But we do know this from looking into other cases. I can tell you that the dog man issue and the squatches as well, I've come across a large number of cases where these beings are harassing people in their homes. And we talked about that in a video. We'll probably do another whole video on that. And in many cases, these beings are tapping on windows where the child's bedroom is and trying to lure them outside with, let's come out, why don't you come out and play? Or we have candy out here, any number of incentives to try to get. And sometimes some of these parents have caught their children going out the front door in the middle of the night.
I was just making a note of that. I just heard a
Yeah,
story where the child was trying to walk out the front door, and mom's like, "Where are you
right.
going?" He's like, "I'm going to play with the I forget what they called the is a I think it was Sasquatch. I
Right.
forget what she called it, what the child called it, but she's like, "I'm going to play."
Right.
Yeah,
And again, you look back at the Native American population and the fact that they spoke about these beings taking children. And you have to add that to what's going on. And either they were liars and were making that up just to, try to pull one over on the white folks that were showing up, or what they were saying they had actually experienced. And so, but one thing's for sure, what they claimed, the Indians that is now being verified by people who live out in rural areas who are having their children lured out of the house at the middle of the night by these beings. And add that to the fact that we have, you can say it's connected or not, but we have another gentleman named David Politis who's documenting children going missing. Now, not all of David Politis's stories that he's found are recent. Like I said, they stretch back. So it's not as if all of these are happening all over the country right now, every day, or else, people would catch on. It's sparse enough to where it has gone under the radar until David Politis really was the first one to kind of put all these things together. There was one that I heard that happened right about the time that I first heard about missing 411, and I think that he's covered it. But I remember this was covered. It was a case in Minnesota, and it was a man who was in the Somali community that's in the Twin Cities area of, I guess, St. Paul and Minneapolis, and he had gone out with buddies drinking, and on the way home, he had, according to his friends, asked to be dropped off at a gas station, and I forget exactly what he wanted to get, but he never came home. But his wife did get a voice message of him, and it sounded as if he was being tortured by some otherworldly. And you can go on and look this up and hear the audio. It's pretty hard to listen to. But he was found a week or two later, floating face down in a pond not far away. and he had a very high amount of a foreign substance that had been injected into his system. So, make of that what you will. We This is yet another case of something inexplicable, and this does happen. It's not always out in Yosemite. Sometimes it happens. Matter of fact, I think that Politis has done a book on it happening around college campuses. There's some famous cases where it's happened in buildings. The famous case where the woman goes into the elevator. I forget the name. She ends up being found in a tank of water on top of the building inexplicably. Nobody can figure out how it happened. And then you also have, in
I've seen
addition
that one.
to,
I've seen that video.
crazy.
She looks like she's interacting with something that's right off camera, but
Yep.
obviously you can't see what it is. Yeah, that one was bizarre.
Very, very bizarre.
Yeah.
And it was that hotel in Los Angeles that is known for having a dark history, put it that way. To where the demonic would feel very at home in that place. And so, you also have what's come out of all this, that's more and more sightings of what can only be described as the predator type being. And what I mean by that is not the not the dreadlocked thing with the metal suit, but it's almost like a holograph type thing. It's a clear, the predator, the way he looks in that movie when he is in that other state, has been described by a lot of people. A lot of people have witnessed that. That's also been talked about a lot on the Skinwalker Ranch. They've talked about seeing that. And so that has become, I don't know if you could list that as another cryptid, because it seems that this is simply another state that these cryptids can go into, whether they're in that dimension. Right.
It's like they're camouflaged or cloaked.
Exactly.
Going back to your point about the kids, it's like you say they're unable to verbalize what happened to them. I think maybe that might be a reason why they're taken and why they're allowed to come back. Because the fuzzy man or the bear on two legs, it's like nobody's going to take that seriously when they come back and they start trying to describe what they've encountered or what they've been with. And I really think that's why one of the reasons why they take children and why children are allowed to come back.
Yep.
I mean, not obviously not all of them, but usually when they do come back, it is the children, and they can't verbalize. The furry man kept me warm at night. It's like the furry man. Oh, it must have been a bear. That's their rational explanation for it. This bear took this kid and kept it warm.
Right.
So.
And they do put that out as an explanation that a bear was doing that, which is preposterous.
That's why I use that specific example, because that's one of the ones they use, and it's ridiculous.
And I genuinely deeply believe, and it's just a theory, I'm not saying it's true, but for me, the reason why so many kids are come back is I do believe that the angels intervene in these cases, and that these are individuals, these children are ones that the Lord, for whatever reason, it does not allow to be taken. And I don't understand that completely, but I do believe that that's why so many children, because the Lord has plans for these. He must know that down the road they're going to accept him. And with that being the case, with them, future Christians, he's not going to allow them to be snuffed out by something like this. So I believe that angels, and I think that when they're found in these obvious places, that they've been put there I really do, by these angels. And I think that's another reason why a lot of times these kids have been missing for days, and yet their clothes are not dirty. They're in very good shape. They've survived nights where it's gotten down and below freezing, because they've been kept. And I also think that there are cases where these kids are taken by these entities. I don't believe that all these cryptids that take kids immediately try to kill them. I think there is a curiosity effect sometimes. I don't think sometimes they do have murder on their minds. Other times I think they're just doing it to do it. And so they probably do take kids and then release them on their own at times. Or it's possible that some of the cryptids that are not evil intercede, because it's going to cause a big problem for them. if you have a big search in an area that they may not want. These, you have to remember, these cryptids are not stupid animals. They're half, the DNA shows us, if you want to talk about science, the DNA shows us they are half human. We we got to stop thinking about them as being dumb apes, because they're not. They don't look like dumb apes. They don't act like dumb apes. Even when they do the mind speak, they don't talk like dumb apes at all. So they're far smarter and more intelligent than we give them credit for. I'm not saying every last one of them is. I'm sure there's stupid ones and whatnot as well. But for the most part, that we're not dealing with gorillas in the mist here. These are very intelligent beings, and they come in all different shapes and sizes and have different. Some of them, I'm convinced, um, are quite friendly and helpful, and the majority of them, I think, are not so much, are bad. But that's just, I'm basing that on what their origins are.
Well, if they're half angel and half human, excuse me, then there's if they're half human, there's some of them that've got to be dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Right.
no, I think that plays into it. Angels have always been fascinated with humans, and they've always been looking in on human affairs, and I think maybe that might play a part in it. Maybe the angel side of them is still, I mean, obviously they're fascinated with humans, these Sasquatch or forest giants, whatever you want to call them. And if they are half angel, then that just plays to the fact that that's why they're so fascinated with us. And maybe that's why they take us to see, I mean, who could say why? To study us, to maybe just because their fascination gets the better of them and they want to get a much closer look. And, maybe that's part of the reason why the children are brought back, that half angel side. Maybe
Right.
the half human side is why they kill people. They give in to their instincts, basic human instincts. And that's just a theory of mine. That's just something
Sure.
I've thought of. That's not saying that's fact or anything, but I don't know. It makes sense, at least to me.
We don't have a lot of facts here. The only facts we really have are that people are disappearing. That's a fact, and people have been disappearing for a long time under very, very strange circumstances. And really, even listening to Jeff and I on this, you can't really appreciate the what's going on until you dive into some of the details yourself. And a lot of people just don't want to do that because, well, the football game is on tonight, and I love sports as much as anybody. But for a lot of people, that's the extent of their intellectual curiosity about the universe we live in, begins and ends with the kickoff on Monday Night Football. And that's partly why we have a lot of the problems that we have in the country and the world, because we have our priorities mixed up. And this is something that's been going on. These are actual real people, like I've said over and over, that have gone missing. This 14-year-old Stacy Ross that went missing, I was talking about before, like I said in the last video, when she got up that day, and it's hard to say, but it's true. All these people, when they go out hiking, the lady that was the photographer I told you about, that was the writer in Seattle, she never thought when she went up on the mountain that day that she would never come back. And that happens over and over. And these people, they haven't done anything wrong. All they're doing is trying to enjoy the outdoors a lot of times, and yet they're snatched. And that's really what it is. They're snatched. Sometimes pieces of them are found later on, years down the road. They find bone fragments and pieces of clothes, and like you said before, a knapsack. Another reason why these people being waylaid is not really a good reason, is because these people are found. If it was somebody attacking them, a lot of times the person would take their wallet and their money. They're found with money and valuables all right there. And so that's something that would have factored in as well, that people, whenever this is doing it, isn't interested in getting their stuff. And um, it's there's a lot more to it. 11 books, and who knows how many other accounts. He says he gets new accounts all the time. I hear about accounts all the time.
Another thing that they also say, sometimes, like, the coroners look at these bodies that they find them like you said, there's no wear and tear on the clothes, they're not dirty. You would think if somebody had been out missing for 3 days in the woods, they'd be dirty. Their clothes would at least have some kind of dirt or grime on them, maybe even a little tattered, but they're not. The clothes are in the same condition as when they went missing. It's almost like they had a shower. I'm not saying they're cleaner than they were when they went missing, but they're just as clean. They're not dirty at all. And sometimes the coroners can't find a reason for their death. That comes up a lot too in these stories. Is there's no discernible reason for death. You know, you can't point to hypothermia, or you can't point to starvation, because even the coroners are baffled by these circumstances, and they can't point to one thing and say, you know, this is why they died. And sometimes they can't even come up with a reason. It's almost like when they say, oh, well, we found them in water, it must have been an accidental drowning, but there's no water in the lungs. You know,
Right.
People when they drown and they're don't they blow up a little bit?
But see, there's
the
enough.
word's escaping me.
There's enough plausibility to the explanation for people to accept it, and that's all that matters. Most people will hear the coroner say that and just, oh, well, see, that's all it was. People are eager to blow stuff off.
Well, also, you know, if a coroner's saying it, then why wouldn't you believe them? That's their job. Their job is to determine a reason for death, and if they say it, well, you know, they're the coroner. They know best.
Right.
You know, we should accept what they say. But when you look at the facts and when you look at the circumstances, it couldn't possibly be what they're saying it is. So
Sure.
who knows?
Like I was just the abnormal investigations guy. It has a really good channel. He was just talking about I guess it was December of 2021, a case in Scotland where a lady broke down out in a remote area of Scotland and called AAA. And before AAA could get there, when they did get there, she wasn't there. And so eventually she was found over a mile from the vehicle, half eaten. So she was dead, and half of her had been eaten. And so they found where at some point on her tracks, she had been running and from something. And so the authorities came up with a story that she had gotten bored waiting for AAA and went skipping off into the countryside and was attacked by foxes or wolverines that proceeded to eat half of this person. That's ludicrous. There's no cases of foxes attacking people, eating people like that. Foxes don't travel in packs. I mean, it's just It's absurd, you know. And it's
the more absurd part of that story is that she just went skipping off into the wilderness for no reason whatsoever. It's like, you really expect people to believe that?
Right. But most people will. They won't think critically and say that doesn't sound right. They'll just, oh, okay, well, see, they're very eager to have it explained away, because the alternative, and it happens a lot. You see it a lot.
The alternative is scary. The alternative is scary, to put it plainly. A lot of people don't have to face that.
If you ever are involved or see a case of a demonic issue or whatnot that is in a public area, you will be amazed at how rapidly the people all try to explain it away as something other than what they just saw. And that happened, like I said, that one case at a reenactment where I was, and clearly the man was violently possessed, and we all saw it and heard it. It was plain as day. And yet within minutes after this thing had been driven out, people were, oh, it was just epilepsy. He just had epilepsy. So, well, I know people who have epilepsy. They don't do that.
Right.
And but people are desperate for an excuse to explain things away.
All right. Well, I think that might be a good place to stop. We're starting to run a little long. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we close out? We'll
be back, because I'm sure we're leaving out a bunch, so we'll probably want to do another episode.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think there will be a part 2 to this, probably a parts 3 and so on. just like with our cryptid episodes, this is probably going to be an ongoing thing. So if we do leave it, we'll probably eventually come back to it. But I think next time we might just pick up. You know, like you said, I'm sure there's going to be things we think of. So we probably, I don't want to say for sure, but we'll probably pick up with part 2 next time. As I say at the end of every episode, we don't do this for the views. We don't do it for the likes. We don't do it to get as many subscribers as possible. We're just trying to get the message out there that we believe God is trying to relay through us. We started this channel with that belief that God had chosen us to kind of be a voice, and this is our way of witnessing, and this is our way of relaying what he gives to us to put out there. So that's our main purpose on this channel. If we get millions of subscribers, that'd be great, because that would mean that we're getting the word out there, but that's not why we do this. We're just two Christians, two regular guys who just want to do what we feel like God has called us to do. And like I said, we'll probably be back with this topic next time, but if not, we'll definitely be returning to it. So thank you for joining us here on this one, and we'll see you at the next one. God bless.
God bless.